right, what's up, guys? We've had a very eventful day here today in the 49ers world. So figured we'll come on. This is my third live. Jordan will be joining me. This will be his first, so we can get some fresh takes on the matter. Apparently, Instagram automatically turns their volume all the way up for both of us.
Let's see. Well, let me go all the way. Let me go down to like the bare minimum, but it won't let me go silent on it all the way.
Yeah, it doesn't let me do the same either.
Is there feedback from it?
There's a little bit. We'll try it out, see what happens. So basically what we're talking about today is the press conference, how we think it plays into the draft. Obviously wanted to get Jordan's insight on some of the comments that were made today. First of all, Jordan, what was your overall impression of the press conference today?
I think that they were fairly transparent, but I also think there was a level of defensiveness that was there that makes me believe it's not a pick that fans are going to be thrilled about when it's made. And I think that Kyle doesn't really care, truthfully. I think that there is a level of the franchise that does care about marketing and the pulse of the fans, press relations, and all that. I think Kyle's purely just looking at who's going to be the best guy to execute my offense. I've been worried for some time now that it's going to be Mac Jones, and I've accepted that it's going to probably be Mac Jones, and I've come to terms with it being Mac Jones. Again, I have no insight or information that would say it's 100% him, but just the tone of the press conference I got, especially when he said the guy we wanted, we weren't sure he was going to fall to 12. I think it's pretty obvious throughout this draft process. It didn't seem like Justin Fields was going to fall to 12. Trey Lance probably wasn't going to fall to 12. The one guy who might have fallen to 12 was Mac Jones. And when he was talking about how we wanted to dictate things and we wanted things to be in our hands, I immediately was like, okay, well, they moved up for Mac to make sure that they would at least at bare minimum get Mac Jones. And then if they had a guy that blew them away, they might be able to pivot off of that. And that's basically what Schefter and Rappaport were saying earlier too. So ultimately, this is what it comes down to for me. I know a lot of people are going to be pissed if it's Mac Jones. I understand why. This is my whole stance on it, and maybe it'll make people feel better. It made me feel a little bit better. My entire thinking was that Kyle needed to go out and get his guy. He needed to go get a guy that he would trust, that he would let rip the ball down the field, that he would open up the playbook for, that he would finally have some trust in, because it just really has seemed like for a good period of time, I would say back towards it, the very latest, that Minnesota game in the playoffs in 2019, he just really didn't trust Jimmy to run the offense the way that we saw him run it in Atlanta with Matt Ryan. So if Kyle's going to go out and get his guy, which is what I as a fan have wanted him to do, and he decides that that guy is Mac Jones, I'm going to at least give him the benefit of the doubt to see him in camp, see him in preseason, and hopefully see him in regular season games before I'm completely out on it. The bummer is where we're looking at Justin Fields, Trey Lance, and you look at their physical attributes and what they bring, you start to think of these Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson type players where they do all these dynamic things. But ultimately, none of those guys, with the exception of maybe Mahomes, Andy Reid is up there for me too, but none of those guys really have a guy like a Kyle Shanahan that's going to elevate them on his own like that. And my whole thing is that maybe Kyle's at a point now where everyone's making it out to be that he's betting on one of these prospects and his whole career is betting on, which of these guys he takes. And I'm looking at it like maybe he's betting on himself. Maybe he knows how good he is. We know how much swagger he walks around with and how confident he is and how he's generally the smartest guy on the field with a headset in a given day in an NFL field. And maybe he's just looking at it like, hey, Justin Fields could be really good. Trey Lance could be the superstar level player. They also could, flop and not be a guy that's going to be a productive NFL starter. I'm looking at Mac Jones, and I'm just saying hypothetically, this isn't what I think, but hypothetically, maybe he looks at Mac Jones and he's like, I like his processing. I like that they ran a lot of the concepts I want to run at Alabama. I like the fact that he's athletic within the pocket. He's not going to be this guy that's breaking long runs or extending plays really, but within the pocket, he senses pressure really well. His footwork is really good. That's something that came out with the Mike Silver piece. Playing tennis and all those things, as funny as it is, or people joke about it, that kind of stuff really does matter to Kyle. So maybe he's just looking at it like, I like Mac Jones, and I think he's a competent enough guy that he's going to come here on a rookie deal for 5 years. And I see some play where I could elevate him and make him an even better player. but I also know that he's going to be at minimum good enough where when I get these guys wide open, he's going to hit a lot of these throws that unfortunately for the last couple of years, we've seen Garoppolo and Beathard and Mullins, when they've come in for him, miss with regularity. And that's the biggest thing for me. I know people are going to be like, well, they already have Jimmy. Why would they draft Mac Jones? Outside of wearing the number 10, they really don't have very much in common when I watch them play. And I think the fact that we haven't seen Mac do it at the NFL level, it would be unfair to say that he's going to go through his reads better than Jimmy has. But if we're strictly comparing his college tape to what we've seen from Jimmy as of late, Mac is a guy that I don't think Kyle would have worries about missing those reads that we know he's so good as a play caller, he's going to dial up. So I just think that it's something that, again, it's going to take a lot of time for people to digest, but I think that there's definitely an avenue to seeing Mac Jones get picked and be the guy where we can be comfortable as fans and understand why it happened. But it really is going to be a situation where there's going to be a much shorter leash than there would be if it was Trey Lance or Justin Fields in terms of public perception.
Yeah, I mean, you made a lot of really good and compelling points, obviously discussing why and how it could be Mac Jones at 3. When Kyle Shanahan talks about the situation where he had made the comment during his press conference mentioning that you're looking for quarterbacks that throw like Drew Brees, run like Lamar. Who do you think of when you hear that?
So I don't think it's fair to say that any of them run like Lamar, and I don't think it's fair to say any of them go. So this is my whole thing I took away from that, because I think what people were saying was they were thinking that like one of these guys has to fit both. And what I heard from that was you want a guy to be like Drew Brees, and I'm wondering if maybe he's thinking that Mac Jones is like Drew Brees, or maybe he's thinking that Trey Lance runs like he has the rushing ability of a Lamar Jackson, or somebody who can come in, elevate that rushing floor. You can dial up a lot of design runs. So what I took away from that was that he might find a guy who has one. Ideally, you'd have a guy that could do both. But realistically, who's the only guy in the league that's like, I'd say like maybe Patrick Mahomes. If Patrick Mahomes doesn't move like Lamar Jackson, and I understand it's a very vague description, but what I took away from that was that you'd be lucky to find a guy with one of those. And if he did identify a guy who maybe it's something where it's going to be interesting, because I don't know which way Kyle's going to lean. If he wants to expand the offense a little bit and have a little bit more of that quarterback design run, a little bit more mobility out of the pocket, I could see it being a Trey Lance or a Justin Fields. If he's really hell-bent on finding a guy with that processing ability, I wouldn't confidently say that Mac Jones is a better processor, but I do think that his processing was very good, and I could see how a coach like Kyle would become enamored with it. But I don't see a prospect that's both, really. If I had to pick one, it would be Justin Fields, because I think Justin Fields has the best blend of processing ability, mobility, and accuracy, throwing on the run, a lot of these things. I just, for whatever reason, don't. It seems like there's way too much smoke. You know how smoke season goes, but it seems like there's just way too much smoke about Fields not being the guy and Jones or Lance being the guy. And again, they could have just been playing us this whole time. They could come out and announce Fields at 3 on Thursday, and I'd be completely fine with it. I'm just at the point now where I'm like, this has been going on for so long. Like, yeah, and like what Vish said, he literally was talking about like a dream scenario, which again, you can't fault the guy, but like it's unfair. And realistically, if there was a guy that had processing ability of Drew Brees and moved like Lamar Jackson, he'd be going to one of the teams, the two teams picking in front of the 49ers, who both are going to be taking quarterbacks. Like the odds of the 49ers just being like, hey, all these teams have put in hundreds of hours of draft evaluation, but we found the guy that's going to fall to 3 that has this special ability. The Jets and Jaguars, I mean, they kind of don't know what they're doing. I was going to say that it's not like they don't. They kind of don't, but all jokes aside, like, it's just, I think that what Kyle's done is he's shown that he's willing to be a little bit more open-minded when it comes to quarterback evaluation and what he looks for in a quarterback. But I just don't see a scenario where there's any quarterback that fits that description. And again, if it was, they'd be going 1-1 to Jacksonville, and we wouldn't even be able to think about them going to the Niners. So I didn't read too much into that, truthfully.
I honestly, I like the quote a lot. Hold on, I'm echoing here. Try muting my mic or your mic. All right. So in regards to the comment that Kyle Shanahan made, I liked it because when I heard it, I think a lot of Justin Fields. And when I think of Justin Fields, I think of him as an elite runner because when decides to tuck the ball, get outside the pocket, and actually choose to run, he has the shiftiness and the ability to make people miss an open space. He has the lateral quickness, the short area ability to be able to make all different kinds of shifts and movements. Whereas anyone else in this class, I don't think is as good of a runner from the quarterback position as Justin Fields. I feel he is ranked, or he should be considered, the best runner when it comes to actually tucking the ball and going and making people miss. Whereas I look at Trey Lance in that regard. If we're just looking at legs and we're looking at guys who can run and trying to take into account that aspect of what Kyle said with Trey Lance is a great north-south runner. To me, I can kind of see a likened comparison with Trey Lance to Colin Kaepernick in the sense that they're fast and they're good runners, but they're really good running north and south. Whereas you think of Lamar Jackson, you think of Madden, you think of the video game, you think of the dude that has the controller like abilities to hit the juke, hit stick, do all the different kinds of things that you would love to come to see from Madden, which is like Lamar, right? He's a video game type player. So out of anyone in this class coming out of from the quarterback position, I feel like the only one who even has a real shot at being compared to what Kyle said would be Justin Fields, to be honest, if we had to pick one. And so I thought it was an interesting comment. It was said while he was in the heat of the battle in regards to how Kyle gets, right? You ask him a certain question and he gets going a little bit. You see Kyle go from the media talk to he kind of shifts to like, all right, I'm a little not triggered, but like a little heated by that comment. So I'm going to go ahead and just start kind of going off a little bit. And that's kind of when at least my perception of how it was said, was he said it in that one of those moments when I think someone asked him about, again, who he likes at quarterback, who he's tied to, the Kirk Cousins whole situation back and forth. So I just thought it was an interesting situation. But kind of transitioning, we've talked a lot about Mac. Do you see a scenario where Trey Lance is really being discussed as the pick at 3? Do you really think out of Justin Fields, Trey Lance, and Mac Jones that Trey Lance could jump both Justin, jumping an Ohio State kid, jumping an Alabama kid, an FCS guy coming who didn't play in 2020? Do you think he could actually jump these two guys and be the pick at 3?
Yeah, I got disconnected from the Instagram. Do my bad. My phone lagged out. I don't know how to get back in here, but yeah, I do. I think ultimately what it comes down to is, again, like, I don't have a problem with Justin Fields. I don't have a problem with Trey Lance. I just think that at this point, when people like Chris Sims and people like, I don't want to, put too much stock into like Peter King and, Adam Schefter and all these guys. But again, it's like at a certain point, like this was my whole stance on it. I thought that what happened was the 49ers were moving up because they really like Mac Jones. And like what they're saying, I think is true, where they're like, hey, we would be comfortable if we got up to 3 and Mac Jones was the only guy left. Like, or not the only guy left, but the only, like, if we got up there, we didn't like the other guys, and he was the only guy that we felt comfortable with. Like, let's say they had Zach Wilson and Trevor Lawrence or whatever super high on their board. They're guaranteed to get at very least Mac Jones. And it gave people like a month of time to kind of digest, come to terms. Because again, a month ago, I've always thought that like Mac Jones was a decent quarterback. I said in Jason Aponte's clubhouse like a month ago, I thought there were times on tape that he looked better throwing the football than Justin Fields. Not saying he's a better quarterback. I'm just saying like he looked better physically throwing the football, which again is probably one of the more important things you're going to have to do playing that position. But it took me some time to kind of come around to it. And over the last few weeks, I've had time to digest, think about it. And I'm much more okay with it now than I was on March 26th or 27th, whenever that, like, it's like the trade up happened. And then immediately it was like, well, this trade up was for Mac Jones. You have all these big blue,
Right.
blue check mark talking heads talking about it. So my whole thing is that I think that the 49ers, what they've done is they strategically let a lot of that information get out because they wanted to allow some time for the talking heads to kind of rationalize and justify and kind of, again, ease in the pick that would obviously be very unpopular. Like, if they didn't say a word, no leaks came out, and this whole time it was a mystery, and everybody assumed it was going to be Lance, or if we're spending this whole time debating Lance, Fields, and then they come out and they pick Mac Jones at 3, it would be like, it's still going to be chaos. Like, people are going to be pissed if it happens. But imagine if there wasn't like a month of time for people to kind of like come around and be like, you know what, like, it's just coming. I'm going to have to prepare myself for it. And again, there's a lot of people out there who are kind of in denial, who are like, no matter what, they're going to be stuck sitting there, and they're going to be like, well, it's Justin Fields no matter what. It's Justin Fields no matter what. There's a lot of people I care about greatly who are stuck in that mold right now. And it's, I'm having a lot of fun with it. I'm kind of messing with them, but it's a situation where we as fans need to understand that ultimately this decision is something that is not being taken lightly by this front office, by Kyle, by John, by Adam Peters, any of the other scouts. Rich Scandarello, Mike McDaniel, all of these guys have put in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours into this decision. And if they really collectively come to a decision where they're like, hey, Mayo Mac's our guy, this is the guy we want, they have my full support until there's a reason not to. And again, it would be a little bit of a bummer because you would lose the kind of like the optimism of having like a Justin Fields or having a Trey Lance, where you see all these mobile QBs and you see all these, added elements to an offense that you get from a guy that has the ability to run the ball or has the ability to expend time with his buy time with his legs. Trey Lance and Justin Fields definitely both have much stronger arms than Mac Jones. And again, my whole thing is that it's just, there has to be some kind of validity to the fact that this rumor has been persistent, and people are comparing it to like Quinnen Williams and like Nick Bosa and all this stuff. And it's completely different. It's a situation where the first 2 picks are pretty much locked in, and the 49ers are at a point where like this decision is going to define the franchise for the next at least 5 years, probably closer to 10. I don't think that there is just like a media narrative that just got created out of thin air. And I think what's far more likely, and again, this is just my opinion, the thing that's far more likely is that they did move up. They did do it in mind with Mac Jones in mind. And then the report, I think Schefter or Rappaport, one of the two today, said that they've gotten enamored with Trey Lance in the last month doing this process. And that to me makes the most sense, because it would rationalize why there's been so much smoke around Mac Jones. I'm at the point, like I said, I'm just at the point where there has to be some kind of logic to it, because there's no real benefit. I know Kyle said earlier, like, oh, I don't want the league to know what I'm doing. Like, it seems like the Jets and Jags are pretty much locked into who they're taking. I doubt either of them. They both need quarterbacks. I doubt, unless a team gives up their next 5 first-round picks, or they can only give up 4 at a time. Now, unless a team gives up their next 4 first-round picks, a bunch of day 2 picks, which of those 2 is really going to move back? Like, I'm just not seeing the benefit to this being some huge conspiracy where they're just blowing smoke, because it's not like they have a team in front of them that is going to, like, take a quarterback that they're like. It just seems like Wilson and Lawrence are so locked in that what's the benefit?
I have a conspiracy for you.
Let's hear it.
It's a conspiracy that I've been running with for pretty much the entire offseason. Is that the 49ers are trying to trade Jimmy Garoppolo.
Okay.
And so that's basically what I've been working off of, all the reasoning for them to come out and say Jimmy's our quarterback, after saying we're connected to Deshaun. Oh, no. Deshaun's our quarterback. We're connected to Flacco. Oh, no. Deshaun's our quarterback. We're connected to John. No, Jimmy. The whole offseason process, this has been going on since before the 49ers were up at 3. You know what I mean? So, can you mute your mic?
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. So the whole conspiracy that I have going on is basically the 49ers are trying to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. And in order to do so, they're working the supply and demand model ensuring that there is the proper demand or what's the word I'm looking for? Proper return and value to actually trade Jimmy. They don't want to give Jimmy away. Jimmy is a valuable asset. He's a starting quarterback in this league when he's healthy. He's taken a team to his Super Bowl in his only healthy year. So it would, in my opinion, do the 49ers, the best interest to generate as much value, not only in the quarterback that they have on their roster, but to ensure all these other quarterback needy teams don't get the guy that they want. Because what have we heard? We've heard, well, if Mac Jones doesn't go at 3, where does he go? Does he fall out of the top 10? Well, at what point does he go to Denver? Do the Panthers decide to stack Darnold and Mac? There's all different kinds of conversations about where Matt goes at that point if he's not taken at 3 based on the perceived fit with Kyle Shanahan. So in my opinion, if the 49ers are connected to Mac Jones, the 49ers are connected to Trey Lance, the media was already out on Justin Fields, so that narrative doesn't need to be pushed. I feel like that's why no one talks about Justin Fields, is because everyone has already decided on the narrative that they're going to go moving forward with. So in my opinion, the way I'm viewing the smoke and the reason for the smoke is to essentially be able to drive up the value of these other quarterbacks, get other teams to trade up, get other teams to draft these quarterbacks early, to then be able to turn and flip Jimmy for as much of an asset as possible. So that's kind of how I'm viewing the smoke. I've been viewing it that way since we're talking about potential trade targets with veteran quarterbacks. And that's why I feel like it's been an instant switch, right? The second we heard the 49ers going up to 3, it was Mac Jones. And like I've said, I've been already pre-wired to think that they're trying to boost these other quarterback stock, trying to boost Jimmy's value, trying to do anything they can to make sure that's a possibility. So, it's tinfoil hat season around here. So we stay with the thing on us. And so that's kind of how I moved through this entire offseason. Is just, I really think that they're trying to do other things than just take a quarterback at 3.
I'm with that, but I'm also at the point where it's like, I think it really it's going to be really hard to know what they're going to do. So if they end up taking Trey Lance, just because I think he hasn't played in so long, I understand the want to have an insurance in a guy that you have one with. And again, I'm not the biggest proponent of Jimmy G. I don't think that he's somebody that I would, at all costs keep to make sure to have. I think that rookie quarterbacks, all 3 of the rookie quarterbacks that they've been linked to the most, are capable of starting day 1. But I could see a scenario where maybe it would provide them some insurance to kind of ease him in rather than just throwing Trey Lance out there day 1. Whereas I think Justin Fields and Mac Jones I would be a little bit more comfortable with them day 1. I think all 3 could do it. I would feel much better if it was Mac Jones or Justin Fields. And I would feel the best if it was Justin Fields, if they were going to be the day 1 starter, just because of the experience he has over the other 2 guys. I'm just at the point where I think that the whole thing with Jimmy is that his value is, I don't say it's lower than it's ever been, but it's pretty close to that. The report came out today. I think Albert Breer said it, that they are moving off of wanting a first-round pick for him, which they were never going to get in the first place. I commend them for wanting to try to make it seem like they were in a position where they didn't really need to get rid of him and they had the luxury of keeping him, but nobody's going to keep a backup for $25 million if they can help it. Free agency is over, but that money carries over into next season. It would help with Fred Warner's extension. It would help with a lot of these guys that they're going to want to bring back next year. So I'm just at the point where I just don't see the benefit to keeping him around when you've made it very clear you're not committing to him in the long term. And I don't see anything that Jimmy G is really doing outside of maybe the command he might have in the locker room and the respect that his teammates would have for him. that he's doing that Justin Fields, Trey Lance, or Mac Jones wouldn't be able to come in and do for a substantially cheaper price. So I'm with you. I think he's going to get moved. I think it's just a matter of what. If New England ended up giving up their second round pick, I think they pick. We talked about that a little bit. They pick at 46, I think. If they gave up 46, then maybe the 49ers get in a position where they could package 43 and 46, hop back into the first round, take a guy maybe Aziz is still there. That's our guy. If they could still jump back in, get him somewhere at 22, 23. Maybe they could jump up and get a Greg Newsome kind of guy, a player like that. That's a corner they could kind of sit and have not be rushed into starting day one, but could be there to be that contingency plan for next season when they don't have any of the secondary signed. Or maybe, God forbid, I would not be very thrilled about it personally. I love the player. I love the person, but I don't love the positional value. But maybe they see Najee Harris still there in the mid-20s and they package those picks and they move up. And it would be a kind of win-win scenario where you're moving off, you're giving Jimmy a fresh start, you're getting a clean break, and then you're also getting this dynamic bell cow back that we really haven't seen with the 49ers since Shanahan has been there. I would understand it. I think trading up for a running back is just, from a pure objective team building standpoint, is a terrible idea. But there is a part of me, I'm from the Bay Area, born and raised. Najee went to high school in Antioch. Phenomenal player too, but I would be rooting for the local guy who clearly wants to be a part of the 49ers as well. So there's a lot of options there. I think ultimately that's the team that makes the most sense. And then maybe Denver, because I just think Drew Lock is kind of terrible. He has a really big arm, but he's very bad at processing. He's very inconsistent, and I think that Jimmy would be a clear upgrade over him. So New England and Denver would be the two teams that I would watch the most for a trade. I just think at best you're going to get a second-round pick for him at this point.
Right, and I would agree with that. I would think Jimmy's value – at one point I had even wrote sorry, could you mute your mic again? I at one point I even wrote, I think back in January, is that there could be an opportunity that Jimmy Garoppolo just gets flat out released, because at that point it had felt to me that the 49ers had moving off of Jimmy Garoppolo, which is why all the rumors were going on and the Stafford stuff and all that kind of stuff was going on. It just really felt like the 49ers have turned the page on that chapter of the team. So at that point, I actually thought his value was at the lowest, but with kind of seeing how the QB chips have fallen, seeing teams like the Patriots with Cam Newton on a 1-year incentive-based deal doesn't necessarily speak to a long-term investment. With the Bears and Andy Dalton, I would assume that they would like to upgrade that position. Is Jimmy Garoppolo a bigger, upgrade over Dalton? If he can stay healthy and get on the field, he's shown that he can be. So then you can turn that's into assets by essentially just trying to get whatever you can. Is he going to get a first-round pick? Like you said, no, I don't think so. But I think there's an opportunity to do something or package something or put something together where you can move Jimmy and get something in return for him. So we'll see what happens in that regard and how that plays out. But so basically what we've been talking about is you've been kind of trying to look at everything objectively, look at all the smoke surrounding Mac Jones, look at the lack of conversation about Justin Fields, the rise of Trey Lance, and just trying to put it into logical sense from multiple different perspectives. There's a fan perspective, media perspective, team perspective, all different kinds of things that we can look at. And I think with how everything's been progressing up until this point, it has felt like Mac, obviously, based on the reports and everything is coming out. But do you see there being any opportunity for Justin Fields to actually be the pick at 3?
So as much as I've been giving people a lot of, anybody who follows me on Twitter, they've seen I've given people a lot of hard time about it. I've been, pumping up the Mac Jones stuff just because, to be truthful with everybody, it's to make me feel better, because if I can laugh this off, then it will make the sting a little bit easier. I definitely think that there's an avenue where it could be Fields. I just think that I'm not going to ignore all of the people who get paid a good amount of money to report on these things saying that, well, Mac Jones is very real. And again, they could be just kind of in a position where they are being very misleading. We know the 49ers front office and brass has been very tight-lipped with a lot of the stuff they do. So yes, I think that there absolutely is an avenue to Justin Fields being the pick, and I 100% would be thrilled if he would be there, because I think, again, you and I have talked a bunch of times about how he adds an extra ability in the running game. You've comped him a bunch of times, especially that lower body to Russell Wilson, the way he's able to extend plays, the way he keeps his eyes downfield. The only thing I've really ever had a problem with Justin Fields is that elbow dip, and I think that the mechanics can be worked out. His elbow dips a little bit when he throws, but again, if you're still making the throws, as long as it's not taking so much time that you're going to get hit because of it, or you're going to let DBs get in the way of the ball, any of that stuff, aesthetically, it doesn't really matter what I care for as a fan to look at. The results are what matter. So yes, I do think that there's definitely an avenue where it's still there. My whole stance is that it seems like the Mac Jones stuff has just had so much, like at a certain point where there's smoke, there's fire, and that's where it's like, as a fan, I've come to grips with it, and it's a lot easier for me to joke about, Mac Jones and have then sit here and be like, man, what if they really just threw away, 3 years worth of first round picks on a guy that's like unathletic, that's going to be, that has the potential to be just as much of a bust, being stuck in the pocket and not really having the rushing floor and the ability to elevate. So I definitely can see a scenario where Kyle's been familiar with him. He knows that he has that athletic ability that he has kind of described. So it's definitely on the table. I think all three of those guys are on the table. I just am preparing. It's a kind of a prepare for the worst, hope for the best kind of situation. And me, anybody who knows me by nature, I'm going to joke around and mess around as much as possible. And it's just more of a coping mechanism for me at this point. Because I'm not going to lie, when they first traded up, I 100% thought it was for Fields. I thought maybe it would be for, I like Trey Lance. I've been following him a bit. Anybody who plays Dynasty or Devy leagues, for fantasy football, Trey Lance has been a commodity for the last couple seasons, as has Justin Fields. So I was okay with both. I've done pretty extensive research on both. Mac Jones is actually the one that I'd probably done the least by the time the trade happened. And I'm just worried. I don't want to keep going in circles, but I'm just worried that, again, there's so much smoke from so many of these big pundits. And hey, Adam Schefter's been wrong before. Ian Rappaport's been wrong before. Kyle could have been sitting there and just joking the whole time. But the way he kept kind of talking about how the fans need to give it time and not just jump on the pick right away, and the fact that we're hearing reports that they moved up with a specific guy in mind, and that guy was Mac, I can't shake it, Brad. I can't let it go. I'm like, and with Kyle Shanahan, it makes too much sense, because the guy knows how good he is, and I'm not comparing that every single quarterback that's mobile to RG3, because it's just stupid. But there were a lot of reports that they did a great job of building an offense for RG3, but that's not what he wanted to run. That's not what his dad wanted to run. It's what they had to run, because the owner kind of forced that pick on them. If I recall correctly, they actually wanted Russell Wilson in that draft in the 4th round. Wasn't there. They took Kirk Cousins. Injuries had a lot to do with it, but Kirk Cousins ultimately ended up having the better career. So I think we're at a point now where it's kind of like the only people who really probably know what this pick is at this point and feel confident about it are the people that really have firm understanding of what Kyle wants to do with his offense moving forward and how he projects the next 5 to 10 years of the NFL. Because as much as mobile quarterbacks are the wave right now, and having these guys that can buy time and run the ball and do all these things, the NFL is very cyclical. And there's going to be a time where it will shift back more towards pocket-oriented passers. And I just think that if there's anybody in the NFL that's going to make a stand right now while everybody's coveting a Josh Allen, a Kyler Murray, a Patrick Mahomes, it's going to be Kyle Shanahan. That's like, nope, give me the guy that can sit in the pocket, that can do all these little things that my outdated philosophy, the shit that I grew up watching my dad do in the late 90s, early 2000s. Like, give me that guy. I don't care. Like, he's going to be out there swinging his nuts so much where he's like, hey, I'm Kyle Shanahan. I know I'm good. Like, it's like Ricky Bobby, like Talladega Nights, where he's like, I wake up in the morning and I piss excellence. Like, that's how I view Kyle Shanahan looking at himself. Like, he just knows he's that good. So the rational part of me is worried that that's what he's going to end up doing. But, like, there's also a part of me that's like, Justin Fields just makes too much sense to not take him. And that's what scares me, because I've talked to Brad about it a bunch. There's been so many times as a fan of football, not even just for the Niners, for any team, as draft guys, we like watching a lot of these. We're like, wow, this guy's really good. He fits a need. He fits the scheme. This just makes so much sense. And almost always it never happens. Then I end up getting devastated. So yeah, I'm at the point now where it's pretty much like, I'm happy with any of the three, but I'm not going to be as outraged if it's Mac or Lance and not Fields as I would have been probably like 3 weeks ago.
So I used the same exact logic back in 2017. Literally the same exact logic when Deshaun Watson was coming out. I talked about it earlier on the live. I'm a big Clemson guy. Even though I'm a Cal fan, I love the what Clemson produces in regards to NFL talent. I like a lot of the players that have came from Dabo Swinney's program. I like Clemson a lot. Started with DeAndre Hopkins and was an easy transition to Deshaun Watson. But knowing what I knew about Kyle Shanahan, because I knew who Kyle Shanahan was way before he was, signed with the 49ers and took over as coach of our team. I understood what his tendencies were. I understand what he typically, what Kyle goes for in his quarterback. So, I already understood all of that. So that is actually the same logic that I applied to Deshaun Watson at 2 overall before the 49ers made the swap back with Chicago to go from 2 to 3. It was they signed Brian Hoyer. Kyle has talked about it many times with his situation in Washington with RG3 and Kirk Cousins. He always talks about how the starting quarterback and the backup quarterback have to be very similar because you want the drop off and you don't want to be running 2 different schemes for 2 different guys, and that just doesn't work in regards to continuity if you ever need to bring in the backup or do those kinds of things. So that's all that logic that you just applied, I applied in 2017 to make me be okay with the 49ers passing on Deshaun Watson. And when we took Solomon Thomas, I wasn't upset. I wasn't bothered because I already knew. I already knew Deshaun Watson wasn't in the cards. So I was like, okay, I'll just draft him everywhere in Dynasty. And that's how I'll handle the situation, which was going to be a lot of how I was anticipating handling this situation. But there's just something that I can't shake. I feel in my bones that Kyle Shanahan is evolving. And I feel that he knows he needs to evolve. Because I don't think he can keep doing the same thing and expecting different results, because I talked about this before. That's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So that's my biggest thing. Jimmy Garoppolo, CJ Beathard, Nick Mullins, Brian Hoyer, Matt Ryan. It doesn't matter. There's so many guys that Kyle Shanahan has worked in the Mac Jones mold, which is, I think, part of the reason why it's super easy to associate the two and for everyone to believe it and be like, well, look at all his past quarterbacks. Look at Nate Sudfeld. Look at Josh Rosen. Look at these guys. It fits. Okay, well, what about Josh Johnson? Josh Johnson has been rostered since mid last year, and he doesn't fit any of what they do. In fact, Josh Johnson is closest to Justin Fields out of any one of these. So, and again, I'm a conspiracy guy. I talk about this all the time. I started scouting Justin in season last year because I felt that the situation with the 49ers quarterback room was not headed in the right direction. And it just, again, I'm a big feel guy. I just go with my gut. They got a big gut, so I follow it. Makes sense, right? So with that whole situation, when I was scouting Fields and they signed Josh Johnson, I literally had the thought, I wonder if Kyle is rostering a quarterback like Josh Johnson to play with, in the sense of he has the athletic tools. He has the ability to make plays outside the pocket and do those things. I wonder if he's just playing with a prototype version of what Fields or Wilson could be. You know what I mean? Because Fields is a good runner as well. He's very talented when he gets outside the pocket and has to make things happen with his plays. So I had that thought. that, well, maybe Josh Johnson there's a connection to somehow. Again, this was last season, before the last 7 months have happened. So I had that thought back then. So it's just like, again, my thought processes and the way I think through things typically would lend itself to listen to some of the things that the media are saying, to try and connect these same dots, just like the same logic you used just a second ago, the same logic I used in 2017, because we scout coach, we scout Kyle. We don't just scout these players. We have to scout where they're going and what schemes they're fitting into. So with all that being said, it just, to me, like in my gut, and I could be completely wrong, the 49ers could show up on Thursday, turn in the card, and it's Mac Jones. Absolutely, that could be the case. Like that, I'm not sitting here saying there's no way in hell that happens. That could absolutely be a highly likely outcome of what happens on Thursday. But it's just this gut feeling that I have had this whole process. It just makes me feel like he's evolving, and he's evolving off of that mentality. But I am scared of his stubbornness. I am 100% scared of the stubbornness that you mentioned, and believing like he is smarter than almost anyone in the NFL. Hell, look at his coaching tree right now. Look at where all his disciples are placed and how much success they're having with his scheme. Now, so that's just the only thing I'm worried about. I'm worried about his stubbornness. I feel like, based on the evaluation, based on the traits, based on how I perceive Fields to fit Kyle, I feel like it's a great fit, because I look at Fields as a prototypical pocket passer who, within the same scheme, again, they're not running apples to apples scheme. What he did at Ohio State is a lot different than what he did. So I feel like a lot of the narratives are easy to connect. You look at his past quarterback history, you look at how that has gone. Oh, it's easy to connect Mac. You know what type of offense Mac ran at Alabama, Sarkisian's offense, who came from Atlanta, who replaced Kyle. So he's probably using a lot of the same philosophies that Kyle is using, just in a shotgun formation or different, formations or personnel groupings. So I think it's really easy to make that connection. It's super easy. So, but I just feel like this time it's different, and I could be setting myself up for massive disappointment, but it just feels different this time. And so I don't know what your thoughts are about that, but to me, based on just a feel alone, it just feels different.
I want it to, and that's kind of why, like, I've hedged very, very carefully, because if it is Mac Jones, I'm going to laugh. It's going to be funny. It's going to be content for days. Like, as content creators, we're going to be in a great spot. And if it's Justin Fields, I'll be very happy, because I'm going to start to envision all the pain that, as a 49ers fan, I've seen Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray more recently, and all these guys inflict on the 49ers for years. I'm like, man, the tables have kind of turned a little bit. Now it's our turn, and we have Kyle there to back it up too. So it's kind of like, I'm at the point now where it's like, I'm going to be happy no matter what on Thursday. And the reason why is because they clearly went out and they're getting their guy. There's zero pressure on me. If people want to give me a hard time because I've been making jokes about Mac Jones and they take Fields, hey, that's cool. I'm going to be happy as long as they're winning football games. The real pressure is on Kyle and John Lynch, and those are the guys that are going to have to live by this decision. So I'm with you. I think that they're definitely, like, now, especially more so than a few years ago, I think that Kyle has seen the evolution of the league a little bit. I think if the 2017 draft was happening right now, I don't think that there's any chance that they pass on Deshaun Watson. Patrick Mahomes is a little bit more of a projection. There were a few people who really did have him that high on their boards back then, and all credit to them for seeing the talent and just not being concerned about the red flags and being like, hey, like, this guy just has an arm that's once in a generation. But Deshaun Watson was one that was just, again, kind of unacceptable to me. And I don't just say this as a Cal guy because they took a Stanford guy at 3. I just never saw the allure of Solomon Thomas. And admittedly, I was very, very high on Reuben Foster. And I think that the talent was never a problem. It was just kind of some off the field stuff. So when they traded back up and they still got Reuben Foster at 31, I was like, man, look at this front office go. They moved back one spot. They got the guy they claimed they wanted all along. They got Reuben Foster too. Like, this is a great draft. But in hindsight, like, it doesn't matter what the hell they did. They needed to get a quarterback, and they passed on one of the better quarterback talents that is in the league right now. I think that if you ask most people, Deshaun Watson would be no lower than 5th. I would have him closer to 3 probably in terms of just overall quarterback talent at this point. And it was evident. And it was a guy, this is where I'm going to draw the comparison to Fields a little bit. Watching Deshaun Watson back-to-back years, but again, Clemson wasn't a bad team, but I don't think they were anywhere near as loaded as those Alabama teams that had a Reuben Foster, that had a Minka Fitzpatrick, that had this just loaded defense full of guys in the NFL now, that had Jonathan Allen, just all across the board. And he went toe-to-toe with them in back-to-back seasons and held his own. And watching Fields against Clemson this past season reminded me a lot of that. And again, even against Alabama, the game wasn't really close from the beginning, but Fields stood in there and he made a lot of big-time throws in a big-time moment when he was hurt. So I think that the only thing that would really concern me, again, is I had no idea even about this until 4 days ago. If there really is a concern with the epilepsy thing, which, again, most medical experts that I've seen comment on it say, hey, it's under control. You can medicate it. Diet, like, he takes it very seriously. So which is why we probably haven't heard about it. But if the Niners are looking at it and they're like, hey, this is something where, if he gets hit the wrong way one day or something, he has a seizure or something because of it, as much as you want to care about him from a personal level too, these guys are also assets as well for your business. And if he's going to end up being unable to play football after investing that kind of capital, I can see them shying away because of that. Again, this is just a hypothetical. I have no idea how epilepsy would affect him. I didn't even know the guy had it until 5 days ago. But that's like that. And then again, the shoulder or the elbow dipping when he throws, it's a slight little aesthetic thing that I don't like. But other than that, I would really have a hard time finding something that I don't like about Justin Fields. I
have a hypothetical for you that you sparked. So the hypothetical is, what do you think Kyle would survive more? Drafting Justin Fields and Justin Fields, let's say a couple years down the road, having epilepsy issues or actually seeing some issues from the epilepsy that causes his availability, his playing, or any of that, to the point where, let's just say, it's not how we anticipated his career to go. How would you stack that against Kyle taking Mac Jones and Mac Jones just not being what, or let's say Fields and Lance go somewhere else, they have great careers. And you have the Trubisky, Watson, Mahomes thing all over again. And you take those two situations. You take Fields not being successful because of epilepsy, or Mac Jones just not being successful because of the perceived limitations. What do you think? Does Kyle have a better chance surviving one over the other based on, I would say, external circumstances?
100%. It's going to be, if you take Fields or you take Lance, in my opinion, in the court of public, like, you're talking about the court of public opinion or the court of Jed York? Because I think that they're two different things.
Speak from both.
Okay, so first, the court of public opinion, 90% of the fan base is going to be okay with it if you take Justin Fields and he's this great talent, but it just ends up being kind of, the doctors said that the epilepsy would be an issue. He got hit the wrong way one day, and it just ended up being a situation where he had to walk away from football because his livelihood was at stake. But they took the swing at the athletic guy that just physically was more imposing. That, I always equate upside and ceiling. I hate using those words because they correlate directly to athleticism. But if you look at Mac Jones and his beer gut and his dad bod, and you compare it to Justin Fields, Fields is clearly the better athlete. So I will use the word upside in that sense, where you see the ability to add rushing to the offense, add all these things. I just don't know that there's a way that you could take Mac Jones, and if he doesn't pan out, it will ever be better than Fields or some of these other guys not panning out. Like, if you take the risk on the athletic guy, then ultimately, speaking from my own point of view and from the pulse of the fans that I see on a regular basis, they would be upset. You want the quarterback to succeed, but I think people would be able to look back and be like, hey, you know what? Like, they took a swing at a guy. Like, hypothetically, I'll give you this. So, like, if Arizona took Lamar Jackson at 10 instead of Josh Rosen and Lamar Jackson didn't pan out, I'd feel way better as a Cardinals fan than I would have them spending a pick on Josh Rosen, because Lamar Jackson was clearly a more physically talented person, as evidenced by the fact that he won an MVP in year 2, and meanwhile Josh Rosen's buried on the Niners depth chart at 3 or 4 or whatever. So if you take the athletic guy, I think you will always have a little bit more leeway with the fan base because you're at least swinging. And I think that's the point the Niners are at where, hey, we saw that they could win games with Jimmy Garoppolo. And I know health is the biggest problem, but we saw that they could win with a quarterback who's probably somewhere between that 15 to 20 to 25 range, not a top 5, top 10 quarterback, probably not even top 15, but a guy that could come in, execute the offense to a certain degree. And it would be very hard to justify them swinging on a guy that is just kind of the same mold where he's going to be good with the stuff around him, but he's not really going to elevate the offense to the level that an athletic quarterback would, versus if they were to swing on a Justin Fields or a Trey Lance and, hey, for whatever reason, it just didn't work out, you could at least justify to yourself that they didn't get complacent. They went for the home run, and they ended up striking out. It is what it is. I'd much rather them do that than they continue to just bunt or hit singles, and they're making the playoffs every year, but they're not getting anywhere with it. They're getting beaten by guys that do have that mobility and that athleticism. So, yeah, it would have to be the one where just you take Justin Fields and it just ends up being a medical problem. And I think that the best avenue that they could probably take, given that medical history and that stuff, let's say they take Justin Fields this year, identify a guy late in the second round, third round next year, and take another quarterback next year and have some kind of insurance policy. Maybe they take a guy this year like they did when they took RG3 and they took Kirk Cousins. Maybe they take a Davis Mills. Maybe they take, Jamie Newman would probably be a little bit closer to what Justin Fields can do. He's nowhere near as good, but he would be a big guy, mobile guy with an arm. Maybe you kind of hedge your bet a little bit at that position because I don't think you're going to find a veteran that's going to match what a Fields or a Lance could do. And if you were content with that, you probably would have just stuck with Jimmy in the first place. And that's where I'm with you on the feeling different this year because as a fan, again, I appreciate all that he did, but I was getting very fed up with Jimmy for a long time. Anybody who follows me on Twitter knows this very well. And I don't see a scenario where you get so fed up with this guy and you cloak it under like the availability thing, because any fan that sits there and watches him misreads, take sacks he shouldn't, miss balls he shouldn't, hey, it happens. He's a human being. But Kyle Shanahan's going to be infinitely more pissed off about it than we are as the guy that's dialing up these open reads. So how can you sit there as Kyle Shanahan and be like, okay, you know what? I'm sick of this. I'm moving on from this guy. And then you take Mac Jones. Rationally, it makes zero sense, but as people, like the 49ers fans, everybody in the chat who's watching this now, we know Kyle Shanahan very well after these last 4.5 years or whatever it's been, and you can start to be like, damn, you know what? Like it might be Mac Jones, but all 31 other teams, I would be like, why are we even talking about this? I'd pull out a Rich Madrid. What the hell are we even talking about, man? Like that's how I would feel, but it has to be different this year. Like we finally have to be at a point where it's different. And I'm with you. I'm hoping that it is the case. I would give Kyle Shanahan much more of a pass if he finally was like, you know what? I'm this dynamic offensive mind. Let me go ahead and go out there and try and get my Josh Allen, my Patrick Mahomes, my Russell Wilson. And I would be okay if they swung and missed at it because at least they tried. And again, you don't get a trophy for trying. There's no participation trophies for drafting a quarterback who ends up not being very good. But as a fan, I would feel good that they at least were like, hey, this division is stacked with loaded quarterbacks, especially with Stafford coming in now. We need to get better. And it's going to be a very hard sell to the fan base that Mac Jones is going to be of the same caliber of a Matthew Stafford or a Kyler Murray or a Russell Wilson.
So this is actually a really good point. He says, if Mac Jones was able to elevate Alabama's offense when Tua, an athletic quarterback, went down, why couldn't he do the same in the NFL? And that's a good point. But I will also be one of the people to say I've never been high on Tua. I thought he showed promise, and he's an excitable quarterback, and he showed he showed ability. But from my evaluation standpoint, I've just never been a Tua guy. I've just never really bought into what Tua provides and being able to think that would translate to the NFL scheme as well. So I don't know. I mean, I get what he's saying. I get the point. I think the point is valid, right? It gets you thinking a little bit. But just from my perspective, taking a step back, evaluating each quarterback in a vacuum, Tua and Mac Jones, I would probably take Mac Jones over Tua. And not like I've never thought about that. I've never had this thought process. I'm thinking about it like in person, like you're seeing the wheels spin. I would probably take Mac Jones over Tua. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I know it's a little bit off topic, but what do you think about that?
That's really tough for me because I actually am a Tua truther, and I still believe in Tua, and I think that it's great that Miami is perceived to be giving him another chance by trading back from 3. I think that Tua is much more, I don't want to say accurate because Mac Jones was the most accurate quarterback in the history of college football last year, but there's something that I saw Tua's ability to thread the needle in the short to intermediate in a different way that I saw from Mac Jones. I think the biggest concern with Tua is that I don't think that hip is 100% yet. I think he may be close to it, but I think last year there was still some getting used to because I thought he drove the ball much better before that dislocated hip injury that he suffered at the end of 2019. It's tough, but I have bias, so I would probably
take Tua. Talk from your standpoint.
Like I would probably take Tua just because of my bias, truthfully. But I could see the argument for Mac Jones, and I know that Devontae Smith was asked about it by an NFL team during their draft meetings, and he said he would take Mac too. I think that there is an argument to be made that the offense looked much better with Mac Jones than it did with Tua. It would be very close for me, and the only toss-up would be that I feel like I would, and this is just a complete cop-out, I'll be completely honest, I would feel like I'd be bailing on my conviction of defending Tua if I said Mac Jones, but I can strongly envision an argument that makes a lot of sense where you take Mac Jones over him. And the biggest thing for me is that I think that the biggest difference is under pressure. Mac Jones under pressure, to me, that's something I've said from the beginning. I think that Mac Jones, when the pocket has collapsed, from the tape that I watched, I thought that he made a lot better throws with pressure in his face, not necessarily with a guy coming at him unblocked, but with that pocket starting to collapse and starting to feel that pressure and feel the rush coming on. I thought that he just threw some darts this year. And I understand the argument that he has these first-round receivers. He had Waddle, he had Smith, he had a great running back and a good O-line and all these things. But ultimately, when I'm looking at quarterbacks, what I want to see is them putting the ball in a specific spot over and over again, because it doesn't matter who the defender is, who the receiver is. If you're repeatedly putting the ball in that spot, it's going to translate, in my opinion, more so than just being big and being fast or having a huge arm. And that's the thing that kind of blows me away about Mac Jones, because again, you look at him, like he's not built like an athlete. He doesn't look like an athlete. He doesn't have this big arm that blows you away like you saw him in Mobile. But repeatedly, I'm seeing on tape, he's getting the ball out. It's a crisp, tight spiral going to the right spot over and over again. And I think the biggest thing that maybe separates them is I think that the throwing between the numbers and probably between 10 to 25 yards, I like a lot more from Mac Jones than I would from Tua. So my bias would want me to pick Tua, and then I could also justify that he's a little bit more athletic. I think he's a little bit more nimble. You could do a little bit more from a bootleg standpoint or RPOs and all that. But I saw a comment say, if Tua was a top 5 pick, why couldn't Mac Jones be? I think that is totally fair. I think that is a great point. And I think that wasn't held against Tua at all in the pre-draft process. From what I recall watching, I never saw the amount of he had a great O-line and he had a great receiver group, and he had that, they had two receivers go in the first round last year, and there's going to be 2 more this year that he was throwing to. He had a better skill group position than Mac Jones had, and Mac Jones not only was better, but had arguably the best season that a quarterback has ever had in college football. So I'm throwing my bias aside. I would take Mac Jones, and I still love you, Tua. I doubt you're watching this, but if you are, I believe in you. I think that you're going to light it up, dude. But you can't argue with results, and that's the biggest thing. Is I try to be as objective as possible, and just results you cannot deny. And Mac Jones is a guy, again, that while it's not the sexiest pick and it's not the most optimistic outlook, it's so hard to ignore just the results that the guy produced. And I'm not one for QB wins. I think that's a stupid stat. I think that there's so much that goes into it, but I think that he had a great deal of influence and responsibility that directly contributed to the wins that Alabama was getting. And it wasn't just a situation where they had this, like Greg McElroy and, was the other, AJ McCarron. They won a ton of games at Alabama too, but it wasn't at nearly the same level of responsibility or influence that Mac Jones had. So it would be Jones. Yeah, it would be Jones.
So I love it because I think what you guys just got to see, one of the reasons why I love talking this stuff with Jordan is because he has the ability to put his bias to the side. I have bias. I have bias towards prospects, of course. I'm biased towards Justin Fields. I'm biased towards other prospects that I've been scouting and in the past. But I think that's really good way. I like how you talked through that objectively to really kind of place it properly. But I also do like that point too. And I mean, we all understand the positional value when it comes to quarterback. Quarterbacks are always going to get elevated. It doesn't matter if it's Jake Locker, Christian Ponder, Blaine Gabbert, Bortles, EJ Manuel. These guys are going to get elevated depending on what the class looks like that year. And I think based on that situation and how the class looked when Tua was coming out, it made sense and all that kind of stuff. Oh, look we got guys subscribing because of the hot takes. Let's go. Not even hot takes, just objective feedback. So I like how that kind of went off on a tangent there and kind of spurred us off onto a different topic, but it was fun to talk about and kind of look at the Mac Jones situation in a different light. Because again, you compared to Tua went top 5. I said just right now I would take Mac Jones over Tua. You're a Tua guy, and you just had to objectively go through the entire scenario, and you came out with Mac Jones on the other side. So again, it kind of ties back into this situation with what's going on. Like if Mac Jones is the pick, back to some of your points that you made earlier of why Kyle Shanahan would do so, I mean, it's making me think a little bit differently based on the conversation we just had about Tua. So it could be Mac. It really could. And we've talked about this many times. If it is, and we're doing our draft show on Thursday and number 3, and it comes across the board, Mac Jones is the pick at 3. You and I will be able to talk about Mac Jones in a positive light and talk about what attributes he brings to the table that will help the 49ers be successful in the NFL. The problem is that the 49ers taking a guy in Mac Jones perceived to be available at 12 or could be available at 12. I think we both know that wasn't going to be the case regardless of the scenario. So they go up in there, they get their guy at 3. I think the biggest problem with it is the other guys available, right? It's just who else is on the board. If Justin Fields and Trey Lance weren't on the board, we could absolutely talk our way into making this whole Mac Jones thing make a lot more sense. I think what has happened is obviously we've talked about we started this with Kyle's quote from the presser, basically talking about the perfect quarterback, throws like Drew Brees, runs like Lamar, because that's the way the NFL is moving, and everyone wants the NFL to move because it translates into more entertaining football, translates into better fantasy stats, translates into more content for people to talk about, translates into all of that. You're making the quarterback position even more glamorous than it already is by adding these just true athletes at the position rather than the statue. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? At the end of the day, when it's all said and done, you and I agree that Trey Lance, Mac Jones, Justin Fields, they're good quarterbacks. They're all good in their own right. They all do things very well. They all have things that they can work on, and they all have limitations. It's just, where do you put your eggs in which basket and why? So we could talk about this all day, but I think you made some good points. I'm not saying, we got people like super hot on the Mac Jones train right now because we got we can switch some things up and get people talking in a different direction. But it is going to be really, really interesting to see what happens on Thursday. It really, really, really will be.
And I think one of the biggest things too, so like just to keep it real, one thing we have to look at is, first off, there's a way when this happens, whatever happens at 3, there's going to be a way that Brad and I will be able to look at whoever they pick, if it's any of the three, and we could give you some reasons as to why you should be excited about that pick, why the pick was probably made, what the outlook looks like, and something that you could feel really good about. But being completely honest and being completely objective, there are 5 guys that are really rumored to be in that top 5 to 10 range, and the odds of 3 of the 5 being successful NFL quarterbacks are very small. The odds of 2 of them are a little bit better. Historically, it's 1 or 2 of those guys is going to end up being really good, and the fact that the Niners already are at a disadvantage by having the 3rd choice of those guys, it makes it a little bit. It gets very serious very fast, and I think that's the biggest thing that we need to realize here is that as much as these big guys that can throw and run and do all these things look really great, I think that that's something that we kind of get caught up in a recency bias sort of thing. Because while there have been the Randall Cunninghams and even, the John Elways, not like Michael Vick's one of my favorite players of all time, I think the biggest thing is that nowadays the teams are much more willing to scheme for those guys. So like you look at Michael Vick, they tried to throw Michael Vick into a West Coast offense and have him be Steve Young. That was never going to work. If you took Michael Vick coming out this year and you built an offense around his talents, he probably would have ended up being a much better player than he was. And he was already a really good player. That's where my argument comes to, what does Kyle want to do with his offense? Because if he doesn't want to do that dynamic mobile quarterback running, getting him out of the pocket, doing all these things, then Fields or Lance make no sense, even if they are a superior talent. It's ultimately what Kyle wants to do. If Kyle wants to keep running this run-heavy, play-action, West Coast-style scheme that he grew up in, was molded in, and influenced by, there is a very real avenue to where Mac Jones would be the guy that he would feel most comfortable with this pick. And again, I'm not saying that he's the only guy. He's the only one that makes sense. There is a very realistic avenue that, while we as fans, and me personally saying this too, want a guy that's going to be mobile and have a big arm. Because again, as much as I want to see the 49ers win, I watch football to be entertained. It would be much more fun to watch a guy doing stuff like that. I'll never forget in the Super Bowl, the Chiefs got waxed, and the best play I saw in that whole Super Bowl was that throw that Mahomes, I'm pretty sure it was incomplete, where he threw the ball like an inch off the ground as he's falling down. Like, that's entertaining. I want to see that as a fan, but ultimately I want to win more than be entertained, because winning feels much better than being entertained and, being not very good or, being a middling team. So if Kyle Shanahan looks at Mac Jones and he goes, this is the guy that's going to give me the best opportunity to win, he has a chance to prove it to us, in my opinion. And again, I'll respect anybody who's going to be upset about it. It's going to make a lot of sense why you would feel that way. I just think that ultimately Kyle's really going to tip his hand as to what he envisions the next 5 to 10 years, not just the 49ers, but the NFL will look like. Because if he sits there and he just stands firm and he takes the guy that's, not mobile and is going to be the pocket quarterback, I think it makes a very strong statement that he's like, you know what? While all these toolsy guys have been hitting lately and teams have been more willing to scheme around them, I'm going to stick with the traditional guy that I've seen more sustained success from, if you go back and pull the historical data. And I think that the next 5 to 10 years, these toolsy guys might fade out a little bit, or they might not be this dynamic. Defenses will ultimately catch up to them. The defenses are getting stronger and faster too. Give me the guy with the, and I don't want to say with the brains, because I think that would be extremely disrespectful to Trey Lance or Justin Fields, who have the right to claim that they are the smartest quarterback in the draft. But if he sees something mentally from Mac Jones that he doesn't see from the other guys, it will start to make a little bit more sense. There's a lot of range of outcome, but ultimately the draft isn't just about the 49ers. I think a lot of it is about the vision that Kyle Shanahan is a guy who is an influencer, a pioneer, and a guy that other teams think about. How often we started seeing that Debo reverse at all levels of football in the past year. He's a guy that really is kind of at the forefront of football evolution. And if he sits there and he takes a pocket passer with these toolsy guys on the board, I think that's a very strong statement that he is not buying that you need to have this toolsy guy to win.
Right. And then we get back into the conversation about the definition of insanity and doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Or there's so many different layers to it. So it's going to be really interesting to see which way it tips. But let's say we've talked a lot about Mac Jones. We've talked about Justin Fields. What about Trey Lance? What about his fit? Do we see the young 20-year-old coming up from the FCS level being able to jump either one of these Power 5 quarterbacks? Do we really feel that is something that is being discussed. I've liked Mac Jones throughout, or not Mac Jones. I've liked Trey Lance throughout this whole process. I was quick to kind of dispel any of the gimmick notions about him. I was quick to understand that he runs pro style philosophies and actually is a fantastic fit from what he's executed in the past. But do you really think that it's between Mac Jones and Trey Lance and Justin Fields an afterthought, or where do you kind of fit Trey Lance into this situation?
I think that I'm not going to sit here and be like, there's no way they're not thinking about Trey Lance. I think that there's definitely, there has to be some kind of weight to the fact that the people who are reporting that are reporting it, because they don't just put out fluff for clicks. When you get guys like Schefter and Rappaport, they're not in the business of putting out false information just to draw interest. Like, yeah, if they get engagement, it's better for them. So the fact that they're putting it out worries me a little bit, truthfully. I don't think that there's a way we could rule out that they're just out on Justin Fields, but I definitely could see a scenario, yes, where, again, this is what was reported, and it makes sense if you think about it. If they moved up, they really like Mac, and then they started to talk to Trey Lance. They started to talk with his QB coach, who you're familiar with, started to see a lot of the things he's been working on, because he only played one game last season. That's another thing that doesn't really get talked about a lot, or it doesn't get talked about a lot. It does, but it doesn't get enough weight to it, I think, because it's not about the lack of game experience to me, more so than it's generally a guy, like if Mac Jones came out after he only played behind Tua for those 4 games, he would be a day 3 pick, maybe a day 2 at earliest, but he's nowhere near the first round. But having that extra season to boost his draft stock, Joe Burrow the same way. Joe Burrow was okay his junior year, but his senior year coming out and lighting up the SEC, winning that national title, it gave him a chance to boost his stock. So Trey Lance, hypothetically, you'd like to think he's gotten better since he was 19 and he had that really good season. But we just don't have it on tape outside of that one game. And then the thing that really hurts him is that one game he played this year was arguably the worst game that he's played as a college player. So I think the 49ers got into a position where they had to do a little bit more research. They had to talk to these guys. If I'm recalling correctly, I think John Beck was working with him, right? One of Kyle's old guys.
For 3 weeks, they worked together.
Okay, yeah. So he has these guys that give him a little bit of information and can say, hey, this little twitch in his mechanics that may not have looked good on tape, we smoothed that out. It's all good. And I know from talking to you after talking to his QB coach that there are a lot of things that he did work on that he's kind of changed over the last few months for the better. So I could definitely see a scenario where they saw Trey Lance and they do get kind of caught up in that, well, man, this guy's got a big arm. He's mobile. He's smart. I can run with him. I can do a lot of things with him that I wouldn't be able to do with the Mac Jones. And the only thing that I'm really wondering at this point is, what is it about Justin Fields that they don't like? Because, again, the only thing that I've really seen that I'm not a big fan of is there's times where he holds the ball. It seems like a little bit too long, but I do know a lot of that has to do with the fact that Ohio State runs option routes. And a lot of times if the receiver is not declaring their intentions, it'll throw the play off. It'll, kind of mess things up. And then Rich pointed out, anybody who knows Rich Madrid's very smart guy, pointed out that he's had some issues noticing safety rotations. So when the defense rotates the coverage post-snap, they'll show something pre-snap, and then as the snap happens, they're going to rotate the safeties, and the coverage looks different than what it is prior to snapping the ball. And it wasn't an abundance of it, but there was some of that on tape with Fields. So that doesn't seem like something to me that would remove him completely from the conversation. So I'm wondering if there is something beyond this that maybe is causing them to not, because he seems like a very high character guy, and I know, as much as I can rationalize Mac Jones being a good pick, it's completely unfair to just write off Justin Fields and say he has some concerns or some character off the field stuff when Jones literally has those issues documented. He has the DUI. He has these things that are physically tangible there for us to see. And with Fields, it's pure speculation. So I don't know that I would remove him entirely, but I'm just at the point where it's like, I just don't understand how he would be removed from the situation unless the 49ers had this massive red flag where they're like, you know what, great kid, we're wishing well for him, we're not risking the pick on him personally. Like, it can't be an on the field thing is basically what I'm trying to say. It has to be something that we haven't heard yet or that has not been disclosed to like the greater public.
And my headphones cut out a little bit, but you were talking about Justin Fields.
I'm gonna grab my AirPod. I'm gonna grab my other one. Go ahead. I'll be right back. 1 sec.
Okay. Oh no, he left it on. So if you're on YouTube, you're going to get a little bit of an echo. I apologize. So technical difficulties come along with the territory.
My bad. All right, I'm back.
No, you're good. So again, sorry, I missed some of the meat of what you were saying because my headphones cut out on me. So, but essentially, we were talking about Trey Lance, talking about kind of like, could he jump either one of those guys? And your thought process was essentially that it doesn't feel like that would be the case.
My thought process is essentially that I think that there is some validity to the fact that we're hearing reports that it is between Mac Jones and Trey Lance, and that there has to be some kind of, again, the only on the field things that I've seen personally are there's at times where it looks like he holds the ball too long. He had a pretty high sack rate, and the late what Rich brought up was that there was times where he didn't recognize coverage changes and late rotation specifically from the safety position. Again, that's something that can be worked on, though. That's what coaching's for. Most guys aren't coming into the NFL and they're just what they're going to be when they come in right away. There has to be something that is beyond his play on the field. And again, maybe it's the epilepsy thing. Maybe there's some kind of underlying medical condition that hasn't been disclosed yet that they're kind of having some issues with. Because I just can't see a scenario where you're looking at Justin Fields and his body of work, his talent, all these things, his cerebral capacity, his ability to process information, and you're looking at him and you're going, hey, he's just out of the conversation for us at 3. Like that's what would give me a little bit of a hard, like, I just don't see how you could have him completely off the board unless there was some kind of issue. But again, how serious is that issue when you're still having Mac Jones there? Mac Jones had the DUI. And again, even if they're justified as it was years ago, that's something that's a genuine character concern. So there has to be something there is basically what I'm saying that we haven't been privy to that's making them kind of back off of Justin Fields, because that, or again, this is just the greatest smokescreen in the history of smokescreens, and they're really worried that the Jets are going to reverse course and change their mind on Zach Wilson. That's the only other thing that I could think of, which isn't a crazy thought personally.
Right. Because if you remember, the first live that you and I ever did together was a first round mock. And this is like literally the first time we had ever spoken face to face, computer, whatever the hell you want to call it. And we did a mock draft. I had pick number 2. And with the Jets on the clock, and this was after Sims dropped his rankings, right? Putting Wilson 1 overall over Lawrence. This was when he put Fields at the bottom. I took Fields at 2. And I did that in the midst of all of that because, again, I just still feel that same way about Fields. I feel like there's this jockeying potentially between the Jets and the 49ers, LaFleur and Shanahan, Saleh and Shanahan, or however you want to look at it. LaFleur obviously being part of the QB collective, being there, knowing exactly what Kyle likes, exactly what Kyle wants. Do you do your best to try and throw off the person in front of you? Like maybe because, again, when the 49ers made that trade to 3, there was still talk that the Jets weren't 100% sold on Wilson because of the medical concerns with his throwing shoulder and because he had surgery, and they really wanted to see how everything worked and operated and all that kind of stuff before they even traded Sam Darnold. And again, that was the report. The 49ers were trying to trade Sam Darnold or try to go get Sam Darnold, but the Jets apparently at the time weren't ready to move off of him because they just weren't sure about Wilson's shoulder. Could there be an instance where they don't want the shoulder to be enough of a reason for Wilson to slip and then take Fields? I don't know. That's, I think, just, pie in the sky speculation at this point. But at the time when I took, the Fields at 2, that was a part of the same thought process. Was obviously I believe in Fields. I believe in Fields' ability. I believe Fields is the second best quarterback in this class. I still feel that way over Zach Wilson. We can talk on a different tangent about Zach Wilson's traits and intangibles that will put him above Fields, which I believe are rightfully so. But I've always held true to the fact that Fields is my number 2 quarterback, and I would see him as a better fit for the type of offense that Kyle runs, more so than what Wilson did at BYU and the type of scheme he was executed and all the things that he did to be successful at BYU. So just from that standpoint, there you can take many things away from that. But there's multiple layers to this, right? We know it's lying season. We know it's smoke season. We know that there are things to be gained. And hold on, what does this say? One NFL GM told Peter King that the 49ers ruined the draft trade market with their move up to number 3. So that was just something that came down in a report. So apparently someone's saying that the 49ers ruined the quarterback trade market. Well, that's kind of going back to what we were talking about, how it feels like the 49ers are trying their best to control the quarterback trade market. So, sorry, that was just squirrel had a notification come down. So it's going to be an interesting situation. We're discussing the reasons why there might be a smokescreen. We're discussing why there might be so many attachments from Trey and Mac, but no talk of any attachment to Fields, even though the natural connections are there with the QB collective, the coaches who worked at the QB collective, the coaches continuing, like, who spoke out very strongly earlier in this process when this all started. I don't know. And then, of course, they've switched their tune. They, like Sage Rosenfels, he's completely switched his tune. But again, it just feels like there's a reason, but I don't know why. I feel like it has to do with Jimmy. I feel like it might have to do with someone else. I don't know. It just feels like there's some unknown things going on to play into why there might be so much smoke.
Wouldn't it be the most 49ers thing ever if they somehow took Zach Wilson at 3 after all of this? Like this whole month where we heard he was going to. Like it would be the most 49ers thing ever if somehow. And I wouldn't be upset with it. I know there's a few people whose opinions I really respect that aren't very high on Zach Wilson, but I like what he put on tape from what I saw. Shout out to Javier. Javier Vega was the first person that put me on Zach Wilson. Admittedly, I'm not watching too many BYU games unless they happen to be on late. You know, if the Pac-12 is kind of slow on a Saturday night, I might be watching. But I went out of my way to watch Zach Wilson this year because Javier very early in the season put me on Zach Wilson and put a lot of people on. And I really liked what I saw. But again, it's another situation where, like, if I'm the Jets, I would probably feel better taking Justin Fields, especially for a team that's had so much ineptitude at quarterback. You take a guy that's had the track record of playing in a bigger conference, playing for a longer time, playing for higher stakes. And again, I could see why a team would like Wilson a little bit better. The way that Wilson does, his throwing motion aesthetically is so pleasing. Like, he just looks like a natural thrower of the football. He's throwing from all these different arm angles. I think the fact that he was throwing to a bunch of slow, I don't say unathletic, they're football players, but a lot of guys that wouldn't cut it in a Power 5 conference and was still getting the ball to them and looked good doing it, I think kind of balances out that, well, he didn't play anybody. Yeah, but if you watch those games, BYU, it wasn't like they were steamrolling all these teams either. That their football team wasn't very good, and he had them as a top 10 team at a certain point. So that again would make sense to me. Where if Kyle, because I know that Adam Peters went to go watch BYU play Boise State, which was going to be the toughest game on their schedule before they got Coastal Carolina. And the fact that they went out to go see that game in person before all these, the vaccinations and the COVID numbers were down in the middle of a pandemic, he went out there to go do it. That to me was a very strong statement that they were committed to, hey, I want to see this guy. I want to see how that ball comes out of his hand in person. You can watch all the tape in the world, but Brad is somebody who's done the scouting for a long time. It's way different when you go and you see that person in person. So I could definitely see an avenue where if somehow, like, Fields, Lance, one of these guys goes at 2, and that this whole thing with Wilson in New York was just kind of, a smokescreen, or they get cold feet, something like that happens, and the Niners take Zach Wilson, I would be very happy with that. And I think the fan base would be a lot happier with Zach Wilson than they would be with Mac Jones. He had, I think it was the torn labrum, if I remember correctly, in his shoulder, or if it was labrum or a rotator cuff. But ultimately, this is the timeline of events as simplified as I can make it. He tore his labrum. He kind of didn't play very well. He said he had a lot of pain in it. He could throw, but he had a lot of pain, especially the day after. Gets the labrum fixed. A year goes by. He balls out and vaults himself into the top 5 of the NFL draft when he was nowhere near that. I think a lot of people said they had like a round 6, round 7 grade on him, maybe round 5 at the earliest. So ultimately, he gets his shoulder fixed. It has about a year or so to heal and, recover, and then he starts playing football really well. Like, to me, that's a pretty good sign that, the surgery went well, and, you're getting, like, again, this is super simplified, but I think people look way too much into, well, he hurt his shoulder, but yeah, he went and got it fixed, and there was a clear difference in play after getting the shoulder fixed. All of a sudden, he starts playing really well. Like, the way modern medicine is, if these doctors are able to look at it and they're like, you know what, he got it fixed, he should be fine now, I'm not going to be that worried about it. And I think that that's not what's going to prevent the Jets from taking him. I don't think it would be the shoulder is the point I'm making. I just think that there is a much easier path to justify, just like we were talking about the Niners swinging and missing. If the Jets take Zach Wilson and they swing and miss on him, they're going to look really stupid, because they would have been better off just sticking with Sam Darnold, who I don't think was even that terrible. I just think he was in a really bad situation. But if they took Justin Fields, again, a guy who's a little bit more mobile, I think has a better arm than Sam Darnold, and they missed on him, it would be like, hey, you know what? They tried. They went and took a big chance, didn't work out. So I'm just throwing that out there. I just want that to be out in the universe, that I just think that it's not something that we could rule out, that Zach Wilson is the name that gets called at 3, and everybody's left like, wow, God, the Niners tricked everybody, or they had this smoke screen and this and that. It becomes this huge talking point for all these media heads. Where, it was Zach Wilson, and Kyle comes out, and it was Zach Wilson was the guy they liked all along, and they had good information and this and that. Like, I'm not saying that's what I think is going to happen, but we can't rule that out, and it just would feel like the most 49ers thing possible. Like,
dude, I agree. It would be totally the most 49ers thing ever, and I could totally see it happening. I don't envision it happening, but I could see it happening. Kevin said here on YouTube that the Jets probably don't take Fields, doesn't feel that Fields can handle the New York media. I would actually say that would be one of the reasons why the Jets would take Justin Fields, is because out of any quarterback that is entering into this draft right now, he has dealt with real-time questions and scrutiny from national media and pundits, and was forced to answer it on the biggest stage imaginable. And he did almost every single time. People like to bag on him about his national championship game. I can make the argument that Justin Fields was the only one playing on the Ohio State offense for the national championship game. No one else was doing anything, it felt like. So in that regard, I could make the case that could be the reasoning why they go with Fields. He's mentally tough. He's been there before. He knows what it's like to have the weight of the world, the weight of a fan base, the weight of an organization on your shoulders, and have to look it dead in the face and say, screw you, I'm the best. I'm going to go out here and play. I think that if I'm evaluating and I live in a major market, that is a huge benefit to me, because I can't have a quarterback who can't handle scrutiny, because if he crumbles at the first sign of adversity, then we have a real problem on our hands. With Zach Wilson, we don't know. With Trey Lance, we don't know. Even with Mac Jones, we don't know. Mac Jones is getting all of his scrutiny now. Is this screwing with Mac Jones's head? Like, how's our boy Mac Jones doing through all this? How's Mac Jones handling this narrative?
He's eating cookies and crushing Miller Lights, dude.
How is he handling it? How is he mentally working through this? We don't know. That is part of the evolving evaluation when it comes to these quarterbacks and how they process, how they handle their emotions, how they handle adversity. That's why I'm so high on Fields, is because I've seen him go through it and come out the other side, even in situations like the Natty, where he didn't win, but he still put that team on his shoulders. He still put the entire thing on his back and played as best as he could. So with that being said, in a market like New York, the biggest media market in the world, where these fans expect something from that quarterback. I mean, Joe Namath, they still hang off Joe Namath. So it's a situation where I feel like that has to be taken into consideration, and who knows, maybe that could be the differentiator. Who knows, maybe they're like, we know Justin Fields can handle this. We know Justin Fields is built for this. Justin Fields been doing Netflix original series since he was a junior or senior in high school. Like, this guy is built for the limelight. He's built for this whole situation. So maybe they see that as a better fit, because I feel like with Sam Darnold, that was part of the problem. Sam Darnold's problem isn't that he's not talented. You can make the case that he is like Zach Wilson. I forget what player tweeted it when they made the trade of Sam Darnold and basically admitting to, without saying it, they're taking Wilson. Someone was like, all those throws that Zach Wilson made in his pro day, Sam Darnold has made time and time again in the NFL in real games. Like that, remember the throw that we're talking about? He's rolling to his left, throws across grain, wide receivers running across the field the opposite direction, and he just drops it in the bucket. Well, everyone's like, oh, wow, Zach Wilson. But one NFL player was like, we've seen Sam Darnold do that over and over and over again. Yet you just got rid of him. I think that was the problem. The problem was this for Sam Darnold. The problem was handling the adversity, was handling the pressure and doing those kinds of things and getting his team ready to go. So do we know that Zach Wilson can do that? Has Zach Wilson ever had to bounce back off of a good year or rebound or fight through scrutiny? You could say the same about Trey Lance. You could say the same about Mac Jones. So I just think it's something that should be talked about, should be considered in regards to the evaluation standpoint. Is how do these guys handle pressure? How do these guys work through pressure? And I'm not talking about pressure from defenses. I'm talking about pressure from fans, because it's real. Like, I know firsthand that fans affect players' mental psyche. I know for a fact. So if that's happening here on the West Coast, imagine what the East Coast is like. And so it's just, again, another part of the aspect that I think we focus so much on the physical traits and the physical tools and the physicality of football that we sometimes don't put as much weight into that part of the evaluation. And I just feel that could be, that in of itself could be the differentiator, because that's the differentiator for me in ranking Fields ahead of Wilson. That is the differentiator for me personally. So who knows? Maybe it could be the same for another team.
Yeah, and that plays a lot into it, because I think that's one thing. Like, I think the wording of things can get twisted and literally change an entire career. Like, think about, like, when I hear Sam Darnold, the first thing I think of is that quote that he what was it, 3 years ago, when he said he was seeing ghosts in the pocket. Never lived that down, and that was something that I think people in New York never let him live down. And again, is it fair? That's, up to interpretation. But he gave them the ammunition by saying something that he never needed to disclose. And I think that's one thing we can, again, I'm not a big Jimmy Garoppolo guy personally, but I will say this: the way that he handles the media is very commendable. He never gives them any. The only thing that he ever really gave the media that turned into a big thing was "Feels Great, Baby," and I think we were all feeling pretty great during 2019, and that was a really fun time. But he doesn't. He's never given them any kind of ammunition. We're just throwing teammates under the bus, or he's complaining about Kyle getting on, and we're doing stuff like that. And I think that is something that does get a little bit forgotten, because I think people just assume, well, these guys are NFL athletes. Like, they're getting paid millions of dollars. Of course, they're going to come in and they're going to be, good with the media and do this and that. There's a lot of guys that just don't know how to, that's why there's literally specific coaching just for the ability to speak with media and stuff. And that kind of decision, if you're close enough on evaluation, like if they're looking at Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, and Trey Lance, whoever, they're probably not getting Trevor Lawrence. I think they know that. If they're looking at the guys that they have their choice of the group from, and they're going, you know what? I just think that Zach, and I'm not saying this is what I think they think. I'm just saying if this is hypothetically what they're looking at, and they're like, hey, Zach Wilson's going to be able to come in here. If we have a couple bad games, if he throws some stupid picks or something, he's going to be able to compose himself and carry himself when his face is on the back page of the New York Post or whatever it is, because it's a totally different world out there. So maybe there's more at play than just the off-the-field history and the on-the-field play, but projecting what kind of – because ultimately at the end of the day, you like to think all these teams care about is winning Super Bowls. But ultimately, the NFL is a business, and if you have a guy that can compose himself and carry himself like a professional, and you feel like he's going to be able to represent your brand better, that's going to end up factoring into the draft process, I think, a lot more so than we think. And that's, again, where these teams, they do their interviews, they conduct their stuff, and there's a podcast I listened to. There was a scout from the Titans. I forget the guy's name, but he was talking about how they had a draft meeting with the guy a few years ago, and he came in, and the guy spent the first 10 minutes of the draft meeting. This is basically a job interview to set him up with generational wealth for the rest of his life. He spent the first 10 minutes of the job interview asking them if any of them had a phone charger and if he could plug in his phone somewhere, and finally finding a spot where he could plug in his phone. And he didn't use the player's name, but he said the player ended up being a good NFL player. That was a solid starter that would have contributed on most teams, but they took him immediately off the draft board because the guy came in and he clearly wasn't being as professional as he could be. So my whole point is basically that as much as we get enamored watching tape and highlights and watching whatever we see these guys do on the field, there is so much more to this than just what we see on the field with them playing. And maybe there's a situation, again, this factors into the Niners too. I don't think that I've seen anything that would make me go, yeah, Justin Fields doesn't care. I'd rather take Mac Jones. Even if he's not a better player, Justin Fields doesn't care. I don't see that at all. But maybe there's something that the 49ers are seeing. Maybe there's a small little quirk where they're like, hey, I think Trey Lance and Mac Jones can really do this. I'm not convinced Justin Fields could do it at the same level. And maybe that's why we're seeing so much of this smoke. It's just there's something, and it can't be something that's on the field, in my opinion, because there's nothing that I've seen from anybody who gets paid to do this or people whose acumen is highly regarded around the league circles that's said, hey, Justin Fields is really bad at this. This is why he's not being brought up. It's almost like he was being intentionally slandered, and there was a lot of dirt being thrown on Fields' name when there was no real validity behind it. It's like people were trying to create this narrative that he wasn't this, sought after player, when all accounts are he's a hard worker, he's cerebral, he studies film, and then obviously what we all see. So it just comes back to, it's pure speculation because you and I don't know, but there's so much that goes on behind closed doors. And I just think that it's something that ultimately time will tell. A lot of these stories will come out later down the line, but maybe 5 years from now, we see a situation where there was something with Justin Fields that really made it, hard for the 49ers to feel confident drafting him. And that's why they opted to take Trey Lance or Mac Jones. And it could just be all smoke. And it could just be that they really didn't want the Jets to change their minds. And Justin Fields was the guy all along. And we're all super happy on Friday, and we're all sitting here having a blast thinking about terrorizing the NFC West for the next 10 years. As much fun as I have with the draft stuff, I just want it to happen already because I've been a nervous wreck for the last month deep down. I've tried to suppress it and bury it. I've been going to the beach. I've been going out way more. I've been trying to enjoy this beautiful weather here in the Bay Area. But man, I'm not going to lie. I've been pressed the last month. Just what are they going to do? Because it really is going to be a big it's going to be a decision that could change the NFL for the next 5 to 10 years, truthfully. Not just the 49ers. This really could be the makings of a new dynasty, or it could be the end of Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. So I don't want to get on tangent. I know I'm just rambling now, but it's just there. This is months and months and months of this stuff building up, and it's like we're so close to it. It's like I just want it to happen. What's going to happen already, dude?
Yeah, no, and I think we're getting close to wrapping this up. But dude, you dropped something. We might have to talk about that as its own complete different topic about how important this is to not only the 49ers, but to the NFL. The NFL wants to ensure that the 49ers get this right because the 49ers being good is like the Lakers being good. It's like those teams that just make the entire league better. They move the needle, all of those types of things. You have everything in place. You have the storied franchise. You have the coach. You have the GM. You have everything in place. So the NFL doesn't want to see this thing blow up in its face. They want to see a situation where, we're not. So again, to try and bring this back to the 49ers and along these same topics of discussion, taking it now to ownership, because I think that's another thing that we don't take into account very often is ownership and their responsibility in approving the selection. They're not going to get into the weeds of the scouting. They're not worried about that for the most part. At least I would anticipate that's what Jed York feels. But I do, however, feel that these owners have stake in how this looks from an outside perception, jersey sales, stadium sales, PSLs, ad revenue, ad sales, all those kinds of things that are involved from everything but football, which Jed York is really good at. Say what you want about Jed York, he's really good at the business side of football. So looking at from that standpoint, could you see a situation where Jed York is looking at Mac Jones, looking at all the vitriol that is following Mac Jones everywhere he goes, look at all the questionable things that you can potentially, like, you can tie back to him? Do you think at a certain point, maybe an owner steps in and goes, you know what, like, explain to me like how big the margin is between these three guys and tell me why I should approve Mac Jones over these two guys based on these baked in scenarios of how it's viewed by the fan base, where he's coming from, and what he stands for? Do you think that could be enough to swing the pendulum one way or the other as well?
I think ultimately, I don't think that Jed York will get in the way of Kyle. I think that his decision, his blessing matters, but I think Jed York deserves a lot of credit for the fact that since they've hired Kyle and John, seemingly, he has taken a little bit of a step back compared to previous years. He's kind of let them run things and not had as much of a hands-on approach as what was reported was going on when Harbaugh was here. And I think that ultimately he hired Kyle and he hired John for a reason, because he trusted that these were going to be the guys that were going to right the ship. And hey, they were 7 minutes away from winning a Super Bowl. They came really close to getting some pretty immediate validation for that hire. So I don't see any reason why he wouldn't trust them still to make that pick. I definitely do think that there is an element of, hey, like, I'm giving you this blessing. I'm trading these picks. We're doing all these things. And if you take Mac Jones, it doesn't work out, guess what? That you might get fired before that 6 years runs out and you're out of here. Like that, I think that there's a very clear understanding for something like that. But I don't see a situation where Kyle Shanahan's pounding the table and he's like, Mac Jones is going to be the guy that's going to take my offense to the next level, being the football guy that he is. And then Jed York comes in and goes, well, you know what? Fans on Twitter are going to be on Instagram are going to be a lot more happy if we take Justin Fields. So I don't care what you think about from a football standpoint. This is just purely going to be and I think a franchise that I feel like has done that a lot is Washington, the football team. And I think that they have had a lot of bad years as a result of that, because it seems like Dan Snyder gets so caught up in who's gonna put butts in the seats that year, who's gonna renew season tickets, who's gonna push the brand that is the football team and that immediate thing, without focusing on really building a strong team. And I think that Kyle, having experienced that firsthand, I don't think that he would be on board with committing to the 49ers and committing to this process if he didn't feel like Jed York was going to give him the proper respect of being like, hey, you know what? You're the football guy. I'm the business guy. As long as this guy isn't a complete just menace that's going to have off the field issues or is going to be disrespecting people or just be a total, just jerk or whatever, like, as long as he's somebody that we can build a marketing plan around and he's going to play good football, you have my blessing. And I think that that's a situation where I don't see any of the three guys really being somebody that Jed York has to step in and go, you know what, Kyle, respectfully, you're saying this is going to be the best guy to win. I can't, as a business person, stand by this. The worst thing would probably be the DUI with Mac Jones. But again, I hate to put it this way because drinking and driving is never acceptable, and I'm not ever going to make an excuse for it, but it's something that I can envision them overlooking because it happened a few years ago and it wasn't something that got a huge amount of press and it wasn't something that happened while he was an active member of the 49ers. So I just don't see a scenario where Jed York is going to step in and go, you know what? That's not the guy, unless deep down he's Fields Hive and he's just like, you know what? Sorry, Kyle. Like you thought, and he switches out the draft card, and Kyle's sitting there stunned when Goodell announces Fields. when he wanted Jones. Yeah, I don't see a scenario where it happens. Kyle has too much equity. And Jed York deserves a lot of credit for how much support and how he has empowered the front office and the coaching staff to lead the charge in regards to football decisions.
I agree with that take. I think that that's exactly how it's going to be looked at. I think Jed York will provide input. I think he will have to approve. I think they will have to be, again, they run that situation with the 49ers just like a tech company. So just like anything else with big time decisions, there's multiple levels of approvals just so everyone at the very least is on the same page and is downloaded with the information of what's going to happen and how it's going to happen and all those types of things. So, but in that regard, that's where the input would be given. I don't know. I agree. I don't think Jed York would necessarily tell anyone, hey, like, you aren't making this pick or anything like that. Clearly would be able to provide input from a different perspective. But it's going to be interesting to see. We've talked about quite a bit up until this point. We got hour 45 on the clock. So probably be a good opportunity for Jordan and I to break for the time being. Quinn Miners came on with me earlier. That is on YouTube. If you want to, this is Jordan. This is Splash Cousin. This is my guy. We're going to be doing the live draft show together. So you'll get to hear all our takes in real time. You'll get to see our reaction in real time. You will be able to get to see all of that on Thursday, and we'll be able to decipher all of it. So even if Mac Jones is a pick, we'll be able to somehow reel everyone back in and let them know that he's not terrible as we all like to make him out to be, but it will happen. So quick story. So have you seen that video where I was at the Senior Bowl and I was doing a live on Instagram and Najee Harris was walking off the field? And when he was walking off the field to go into the locker room, I asked Najee, I said, Najee, you going to be there at 49ers at pick 12? And he looked at me and he said, are you the GM? I was like, what? He said, are you the GM? I could be. But then we like had a laugh, whatever, went on its way. And it was a funny moment. So when I was talking with Quinn today, he was like, yo, when you were talking to Najee and you asked him about being there at pick 12, he was like, I was actually walking off the field at that same time, and I saw you ask him that question, and I saw the dialogue, and he said, it's hilarious now because I didn't know at the time who you were or what you were asking, but he's like, that was you asking Najee that question. And he's like, I saw that whole thing from the sideline walking down the tunnel because he was walking off the field too. I thought that was pretty freaking funny. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, damn, Quinn saw me ask Najee Harris if he was going to be there in 12, and Najee asked me if I was a GM. I thought that was pretty funny. But that was just a story from today's interview. If you want to check it out, it's on YouTube. Before we break, Jordan, do you have any parting thoughts before we get out of here?
No, just, if you guys are, hanging out and you want to watch the draft with us, so Brad and I always have a good time. I appreciate him having me on. I appreciate any input from anybody. And if you're worried about Mac Jones being the pick, I promise you I will have something prepared for any of the three guys, and even something for Zach Wilson if he comes out, that will hopefully immediately help us all collectively take a step back from the ledge and not feel like the world is ending. So if you are looking for hopefully a chance, and I'm not promising that I'll be able to do it because you might still just be in a situation where you're like, I don't want to hear anything. I don't want to hear this dude talk. I'm shutting everything off. The Niners just picked Mac Jones. I understand. But, come hang out with us, watch the draft with us. I'll do my best. I know Brad will too, to try to put a positive spin on things, to keep the mood light, and to give you some optimism as to why the Niners picked whoever they end up picking. And, you know, just I'm looking forward to it. The draft's the funnest part of the year to me. That optimism is one thing that, again, until we see these guys play, try to think positive thoughts, because while they might end up being terrible, they also could end up being really good. And it's way more fun to think about that player being really good. And I can promise you I will have some numbers, some data, some highlights. Maybe we could throw up some tape that we could have there for you that would make you sleep a little bit better Thursday night, even if it is Mac Jones, or if they do go with Trey Lance or Fields, Wilson, whoever it may be. You know, and at the end of the day, like I said, we're all in this together. And have faith in Kyle. He's a smart guy. I know he may not be the most open person or the most, you know, happy-go-lucky guy all the time, but he's a genius, and we're really lucky that he's our coach. So just I have faith in him, and I hope everybody else can too.
Well said, Jordan. And we're gonna have a lot of fun on Thursday, regardless of the outcome. It's gonna be fun either way. So hope you guys can join us for that. I'll be posting more about that to keep you guys in the loop of timing and everything like that. We have 2 days until the draft after tonight. So Jordan, I'm pretty sure Jordan and I will probably be talking every day on here up until that point. We'll hopefully get into something else other than just quarterbacks eventually. Heading up into the draft, we'll talk about other draft prospects potentially, and we'll go from there. But again, thank you for everyone who's hopping on. Please like and subscribe on YouTube if you have the opportunity to. We really appreciate it. And we're really looking forward to an exciting draft week as Monday is over and we turn the page to Tuesday tomorrow, and we're one day closer to the draft. So thanks again for everyone tuning in. Jordan, appreciate you as always. And make sure you follow him on Twitter at @splash_cousin. And we'll get this thing popping. So we'll see you guys tomorrow. And until then, see you later.